This video did not find you by chance. It found you at the moment you no longer needed to search. Welcome, traveler of the night. I am speaking to you, not to define you, not to assign you an archetype, but to acknowledge the quiet weight you have carried for a long time. Perhaps you have often been the one who holds space for others, the steady presence, the silent harbor. And perhaps tonight you no longer wish to hold anything at all. You are tired, not from work, but from the invisible gravity of complexes quietly repeating old patterns, even as you lie down. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." But tonight, you do not need to make anything conscious. You do not need to understand. You do not need to expose or fix what appears. Hello, I am Milo. I am not here to guide you forward or to awaken something new. I am simply here to stay with you as everything begins to slow. Tonight does not have to be a journey of effort. If there is a night, sea journey, it unfolds on its own as the persona softens and the shadow is allowed to remain unnamed. You do not need to be an anchor for anyone tonight. The world can turn without you. Nothing will be lost. Before we sink into stillness, there is no ritual to perform, no command to give your subconscious, no intention to seal. There is nothing you must declare, nothing you must accept. Just breathe. Let go. Allow the unconscious to move in its own quiet rhythm. You do not need to be reborn tonight. You only need to rest. Relax your body. Let your breath slow down. And if in this quiet space you drift into sleep, that is perfectly all right. Very all right. Because tonight, you do not need to be enough. You are simply allowed to disappear for a while. And now, as the darkness settles gently around you, there is no threshold to cross, no revelation required. Whatever needs to emerge will do so without your effort. Yes, that is exactly so. The journey of exploring the human psyche, in the light of Carl Gustav Jung, does not begin with fixing or improving oneself, but with a far more humble act, redrawing the map of the soul. Before Jung, human beings were often viewed as psychologically simple creatures, a kind of blank slate shaped and inscribed solely by personal memories, education, and society. But Jung paused before this assumption and posed a deeper question. Is everything that operates within us truly derived only from our personal lives? His answer shook the foundations of modern psychology. Jung proposed that the human psyche does not consist merely of consciousness, the part we know, control, and call I, but is surrounded by something vastly greater, the unconscious. If consciousness centered around the ego is like a small island illuminated by the sunlight of reason, then the unconscious is the immense ocean encircling it, dark deep and filled with currents we cannot see yet, by which we are constantly carried. Jung emphasized that the greatest mistake of modern humanity is identifying oneself entirely with the ego. We believe we are what we think, what we choose, what we are aware of. But according to Jung, this is only the visible tip of the psychological iceberg. He wrote a famous sentence, often quoted, yet rarely contemplated in its full depth. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This statement is not a threat, but a compassionate warning. Jung did not regard the unconscious as an enemy. On the contrary, he saw it as a living entity, rich in energy, creativity, and intelligence, but one that becomes dangerous when ignored. When people fail to recognize the unconscious forces operating within them, they live under the illusion of freedom, while in reality, being governed by motives they do not even know exist. Going beyond Freud, Jung introduced the concept of the collective unconscious, one of his most controversial yet profound contributions. The unconscious for Jung is not merely a repository of forgotten personal memories. It is the psychological inheritance of all humanity. In the deepest layer of the psyche, we share primordial images and ancient patterns that Jung called archetypes. These are not concrete images, but psychological structures, like molds that shape how human beings experience the world. The mother, the hero, the shadow, the betrayer, the child. The wise old man Jung described this succinctly in his own work. The collective unconscious contains the whole spiritual heritage of mankind, as evolution born anew in the brain structure of every individual. This means that even before you have any personal experiences, your soul already carries an ancient map. It is this map that causes your dreams to contain images you have never encountered in waking life, that makes you react intensely to situations that seem insignificant, and that draws you toward certain stories, symbols, or people as if you had known them long ago. Within this picture, the ego is no longer the master of the soul, but merely the manager of the daytime. It helps us adapt to society, make decisions, and maintain a sense of identity. But at night, and in moments of strong emotion, its authority weakens. Then the currents of the unconscious rise in dreams, in sudden anger, in nameless sadness, in actions that later leave us asking, "Why did I do that?" Jung did not see this as pathological. On the contrary, he believed it to be the natural language of the soul. The unconscious is always seeking communication with consciousness in order to restore inner balance. When told consciousness becomes too arrogant, too one-sided, or too identified with social roles, the unconscious responds sometimes through suffering. Yet even when it brings pain, it serves a deeper purpose, what Jung called the teleological nature of the psyche. Therefore, the map of the psyche is not a dry diagram, but an invitation to an inner adventure. Recognizing consciousness and the unconscious is not meant to strip you of control, but to expand your understanding of yourself. When you realize that you are not merely a small ego struggling to control life, but part of a much larger psychological current, something remarkable happens. You become less self-blaming, less afraid of unacceptable emotions, and you begin to listen rather than suppress. Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. To make the darkness conscious is not to sink into gloom, but to widen the light of awareness." And this journey always begins by redrawing the map, not to control the ocean of the unconscious, but to learn how to sail the night sea without panic, trusting that beneath the deep waves, the soul is quietly guiding us back to ourselves. From the map of the psyche, where consciousness is only a small island amid the vast ocean of the unconscious, we begin to recognize an uncomfortable yet liberating truth. Not everything that unfolds within us is decided by the eye. Once we accept that the soul is not a unified whole, the next question naturally arises: what is operating in those dark regions? It is precisely here that Jung introduces one of his boldest and most profound concepts: complexes. According to Carl Gustav Jung, complexes are not merely psychological problems or unhealed wounds. He described them as autonomous splinter psyches, psychological structures with a life of their own, formed from clusters of memories, images, and emotions charged with intense affect. Jung called them splinter psyches, parts of the personality that have split off and do not lie fully under the control of the ego. What is frightening, yet also deeply illuminating, is this: complexes are not only something we have. At times, they have us. Jung stated this firmly and without compromise. Complexes are psychic fragments which have split off owing to traumatic influences or certain incompatible tendencies. Here he is not referring to a rare phenomenon that occurs only in the weak or the pathological. On the contrary, Jung emphasized that every human being has complexes. The only difference lies in whether we are conscious of them or not. When unrecognized complexes operate in the shadows, like invisible train conductors silently switching the tracks of our lives, which we notice only after we have traveled far off course. What makes complexes particularly dangerous is not their content, but their degree of autonomy. Jung observed that when a complex is activated, it can seize control of the entire psyche. Thinking becomes rigid. Emotions erupt disproportionately, and behavior no longer seems to belong to our usual self. After such moments, we often ask ourselves in confusion, why did I react like that? Jung explained this phenomenon with a cool yet precise observation. We are so accustomed to disguise the complexes with the help of euphemisms that we no longer recognize them for what they are. We give them gentler names, personality habits, reflexes, or even that "it's just the way I am." Yet behind these words, the complexes persist quietly, tenaciously, tirelessly. They are nourished by unprocessed emotional energy, often rooted in early life experiences, when the ego was still too fragile to understand and integrate what occurred. A common mistake is to view complexes as enemies to be destroyed. Jung strongly opposed this approach. For him, complexes are not system errors, but traces of a split that seeks healing. They arise when consciousness cannot or dares not take in a certain experience, one that is too painful, too conflicting, or too incompatible with the self-image we wish to maintain. What is rejected does not disappear. It separates and lives its own life within the unconscious. Jung once remarked with sharp irony, "Everyone knows nowadays that people have complexes. What is not so well known, though far more important theoretically, is that complexes can have us." This statement completely overturns our assumptions about free will. We believe we act consciously, yet in many decisive moments, it is the complex that is speaking through sudden anger, uncontrolled jealousy, inexplicable fear, or the need for recognition so strong that we diminish ourselves to obtain it. Yet Jung did not stop at exposing this harsh truth. He saw in complexes a potential for transformation. For every complex contains a living core psychic energy that has not yet been integrated. When recognized and engaged in honest dialogue, the complex ceases to be a saboteur and becomes a valuable source of information about neglected parts of the self. This requires a radically different attitude from self-judgment or self-correction. Jung encouraged a particular kind of attention, non-identifying observation. Not saying I am like this, but rather there is a part of me that is reacting this way. That small distance creates a new inner space where the ego is no longer swallowed, and the complex can finally be seen as an inner figure rather than as the totality of who we are. In this process, Jung warned against a subtle temptation identifying with the complex under the guise of being authentic. He wrote, "Identification with the complex is always dangerous because it leads to a one-sidedness that excludes the total personality." In other words, acknowledging a complex does not mean allowing it to rule. The goal is not to live according to the complex, but to place it within a larger picture of the psyche. Only then can the energy trapped within the complex be released to serve inner growth. Thus, understanding complexes is not about fixing ourselves to become better, but about becoming more whole. It marks a crucial shift from an ego that controls to an ego that dialogues. And it is precisely here that the Jungian journey begins to deepen, no longer a theoretical map of consciousness and the unconscious, but a living encounter with the splintered souls within us, waiting to be heard. Once we understand that complexes are not merely something we have, but at times something that has us a deeper and unavoidable question naturally arises. Where do these autonomous, splintered parts of the soul come from? They do not emerge out of nothing. They have a history, a source, a very specific point of origin in the life of the psyche. It is precisely at this point of intersection between personal experience and the ancient structures of the psyche that Jung lays the foundation for his most profound understanding of the origins of complexes. According to Carl Gustav Jung, a complex forms when an emotionally charged experience encounters an archetypal nucleus lying dormant within the collective unconscious. Trauma, especially childhood trauma, does not by itself create a complex. What determines its formation is which archetype is activated. It is this very combination that gives complexes their persistent and enduring power, allowing them to transcend ordinary memory and become autonomous psychological structures. Jung expressed this clearly when he wrote, "A complex is a psychic fragment that has broken away from consciousness and lives an independent life in the unconscious." But why does an experience have the power to fracture the psyche in this way? The answer lies here. The child's mind does not yet possess an ego strong enough to process contradiction. When confronted with pain, abandonment, conflict, or fear that exceeds its capacity to endure, the psyche is forced to choose a path of survival, to split the experience off from consciousness. What is split off does not disappear. It sinks into the unconscious, carrying with it all the emotional energy that was never released. What distinguishes Jung from other psychoanalysts, however, is that he did not stop at personal trauma. He recognized that trauma is only the spark. The archetype is the fuel. Every child, before having a personal life story, already carries ancient patterns within the mother, the father, the abandoned child, the hero, the betrayer. When a painful experience occurs, it does not fall into an empty space. It lands upon a pre-existing form within the psyche. Jung described the collective unconscious through a powerful image. The collective unconscious contains the whole spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution, born anew in the brain structure of every individual. This means that when a child is neglected, the pain is not merely a personal memory. It touches the archetype of the abandoned child, a psychological form deeply etched into human history. It is this resonance that amplifies the personal experience, lifting it beyond time and allowing it to take deep root in the soul. From that moment on, the complex begins to function like a psychological magnet. Jung observed that complexes do not remain static. They attract. Each time a new situation appears that bears even the faintest resemblance to the original experience, the complex is activated. It draws familiar memories, emotions, and reactions toward itself, reinforcing the inner structure that was formed long ago. Jung called this phenomenon constellation, the clustering of a complex. He wrote, "Complexes are constellated by life situations, which strongly emphasize the emotional tone of the complex." This explains why we so often feel that history repeats itself. Not because the world is deliberately cruel, but because complexes shape the way we interpret reality. Two people may go through the same event, yet only one feels deeply offended. The difference lies not in the event itself, but in the complex that has been activated. Here, Jung offers a statement deeply unsettling to the modern ego. We do not see the world as it is, but as our psyche has been structured. When a complex dominates the present, is colored by the past, and the person standing before us becomes the shadow of those who once wounded us. A complex, therefore, is not merely a memory. It is a lens of perception. Jung warned that ignoring this fact leads to a form of psychological fate. He wrote, "When an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate." This sentence reveals that if we do not confront the origins of our complexes, we will continue to encounter them in life through repeating relationships, familiar conflicts, and emotions that seem never to change. In such cases, the complex becomes an unconscious script that we unknowingly perform again and again. Yet Jung did not view the origin of complexes as a sentence of condemnation. On the contrary, he saw it as the key to transformation. For if a complex is born from the union of trauma and archetype, then making it conscious means reconnecting the individual with the collective depth of humanity. Our pain no longer feels isolated or abnormal. It becomes part of a larger story about the human condition. Jung once wrote a sentence of profound revelation. In each of us, there is another whom we do not know. That other is precisely where complexes are born. When we dare to return to their origins, not to assign blame, but to understand a subtle shift takes place. The complex gradually loses its power to dominate, not because it is suppressed, but because it has been placed in its proper context. Thus, the origin of complexes is not merely a story about trauma, but a story about the intersection between personal life and the collective soul. When this is understood, we cease to see ourselves as victims of the past and begin to recognize that within our deepest wounds, the soul has quietly been preparing the ground for a greater capacity for growth. This is the point where the Jungian journey moves from recognition to transformation. Once we have traced the origins of complexes, where personal trauma intersects with ancient archetypes, we begin to understand why a psychological structure can persist so enduringly within inner life. Yet understanding the origin is still not enough. What makes a complex truly frightening is not the fact that it has been formed, but that it can suddenly surge forth, seize the entire stage of the mind in a single instant. It is precisely at this point that Jung brings us to a familiar, yet rarely confronted phenomenon: emotional detonators, or triggering. From the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, excessive emotional reactions are not signs of weakness or moral failure. They are psychological signals. When you suddenly explode with rage over a minor remark, feel overwhelming anxiety in a situation that poses no real threat, or collapse emotionally, in response to an entirely ordinary rejection. This is not the present speaking. It is the complex being activated. Jung observed that every complex carries an emotional charge. When an external event strikes precisely at this nucleus, all the repressed energy is released at once. He called this the constellation of a complex, the moment when the complex steps out of the shadows and takes control of consciousness. Jung wrote, "When a complex is constellated, it is as though an earthquake had occurred in the psyche." This comparison is not exaggerated. In a triggered state, the ego gradually loses its coordinating capacity. Thinking becomes rigid and polarized. Emotions take on an absolute quality, and behavior is often accompanied by the feeling I am no longer myself. This is the phenomenon Jung called regression, a return to older behavioral patterns formed at an earlier psychological stage. Regression is not backsliding in a moral sense. It is a survival mechanism of the psyche when psychic energy, libido, is seized by a complex present-day consciousness, no longer has sufficient strength to process experience. The mind is forced to revert to older strategies, even if they are outdated, because they are what once ensured survival. Jung explained this candidly. Regression is a turning back to earlier ways of adaptation, not because they are better, but because they are more familiar. What is striking is that the triggering event is often very small. It is disproportionate to the reaction we experience. This lack of proportion is the clearest sign that a complex is at work. If the present were truly the cause, our response would be more measured and flexible. But when a complex is awakened, the present serves merely as a pretext. Jung warned that the ego is highly skilled at deceiving itself. After an emotional outburst, we often construct rational explanations to justify our reaction. Yet Jung saw through this mechanism when he wrote, "Emotion is the chief source of all becoming conscious. There can be no transforming of darkness into light and of apathy into movement without emotion. Intense emotion, therefore, is not something to be extinguished immediately. It is an alarm light signaling that an unconscious part is demanding recognition. When we focus solely on controlling emotions, we miss the message the soul is sending. A subtle point in Jung's thinking is that he did not view libido merely as sexual energy, but as life energy in general. When a complex is activated, a large amount of libido is withdrawn from other conscious functions. Reason empathy, the capacity to see multiple perspectives and concentrated entirely within the complex. As a result, in that moment, the inner world becomes impoverished, yet intense. There is only one emotion, one narrative, one guilty party. Jung described this state as a form of psychological possession. The possession by a complex is always an expression of psychic dissociation. This dissociation causes a person to feel swallowed by their own reaction. And if it goes unrecognized, the cycle continues, triggering explosion, regret, self-blame, and then triggering again. Over time, the complex is further reinforced because each outburst feeds it additional energy. Yet Jung did not view triggering as a sentence of condemnation. On the contrary, he saw it as a gateway to consciousness. For only when a complex becomes strong enough to rupture the surface of everyday life do we gain the opportunity to recognize its existence. Jung wrote a sentence worth deep reflection. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own souls. Excessive reactions, therefore, are not moral failures, but invitations to encounter. The question shifts from, "Why did I react like that?" to, "Which part of me has been touched?" This shift from judgment to curiosity is the first step by which the ego reclaims its observing position rather than being swept away. Jung emphasized that slowing down in the moment of triggering, even by a fleeting thought, such as something old is happening here, is enough to create a crack in the complex grip. He did not demand perfect calm, but minimal awareness. For once a complex is seen, it no longer holds absolute power. Thus, emotional detonators are not enemies of the Jungian journey. They are markers. Each activation points to where the soul remains entangled in the past. If we dare to listen rather than suppress, every excessive reaction becomes a step toward inner maturity. From here, the journey deepens, not only recognizing complexes, not only tracing their origins, but learning to live with these easily triggered parts no longer as their victims, but as their dialogue partners. And it is precisely within this dialogue that Jung believed human beings gradually step out of unconscious fate and onto the path of individuation, where reaction slowly yields to awareness and inner freedom. Once we have identified emotional triggers and understood that excessive reactions do not belong to the present, but are echoes of activated complexes, we are compelled to go one step deeper. For if there is one complex that is most easily triggered, most deeply rooted, and leaves the most enduring imprint on human emotional life, it is the mother complex. Jung regarded this not merely as one complex among many, but as the first blueprint of the psyche, the foundational pattern that shapes how we experience safety, love, dependency, and even the fear of abandonment. According to Carl Gustav Jung, the mother complex is formed at the intersection between the real personal mother and the great mother archetype of the collective unconscious. The flesh and blood mother, with her presence or absence, warmth or coldness, is only half of the equation. The other half belongs to a far more ancient dimension, the archetypal image of the life giver, who nurtures, protects, and shelters, yet who also possesses the power to engulf, control, and destroy. Jung described this dual nature of the mother archetype with striking clarity. The mother archetype contains both positive and negative aspects. It is loving and terrible, life-giving and devouring. It is precisely this duality that gives the mother complex its extraordinary power. When personal experience with the mother touches one of the archetypal poles, whether through excessive protection or emotional absence, the complex begins to form. It does not merely store memories. It shapes the way we experience the world, whether the world is safe or dangerous, whether others are trustworthy, and whether we ourselves are worthy of love. In its positive form, the mother complex can provide a sense of inner support. Individuals who have a sufficiently integrated relationship with this archetype often possess the capacity for self-care, the ability to rest, to seek support when needed, and a fundamental trust that life, however difficult, still allows room for healing. Jung did not deny this value. He regarded it as fertile ground upon which the psyche can grow. But in its negative form, the mother complex becomes a hidden gravitational force. It may manifest as prolonged emotional dependency, chronic anxiety about abandonment, or an unconscious need to be held by others, whether a romantic partner, a spouse, a job, or even an ideology. Jung warned that in such cases, the individual is not truly living in the present, but is searching for the lost mother in countless disguised forms. He wrote, "The mother complex is at the root of the child's dependence on the mother, and later of his dependence on the world." What is crucial to understand is that the mother complex does not affect only relationships with women or with the biological mother. It influences an entire mode of attachment to life itself. An unresolved complex can make separation terrifying. Separation from family, from toxic relationships, from familiar patterns, because in the unconscious separation is equated with the threat of non-existence. Here we begin to see clearly the connection between the mother complex and the emotional triggers discussed earlier. When an adult reacts with panic to minor emotional distance or feels profoundly betrayed when needs are not immediately met, it is very likely that a negative mother complex has been activated. The reaction does not arise from the current relationship, but from a primordial memory of existential dependency. Jung did not shy away from the shadow side of this archetype. He spoke frankly of the image of the devouring mother, a form in which love becomes control and care turns into bondage. He wrote, "The negative mother complex appears in a form of resistance to all influences that would lead to independence. In this state, the individual may unconsciously sabotage their own attempts at growth. For growth implies leaving the safe embrace even when that embrace has long since become suffocating. Thus one simultaneously longs for freedom and fears it, desires love, yet feels deeply threatened when love demands separation. Importantly, Jung did not blame the personal mother. He understood that every mother is herself shaped by her own complexes, and that the archetype is always larger than the individual. The Jungian approach does not seek a culprit, but consciousness. For only when the mother complex is seen as a psychological structure rather than as the truth about who I am, does it begin to lose its governing power. Jung emphasized that this process does not occur through severance, but through a restructuring of the inner relationship. The adult does not need to kill the mother image within, but to withdraw identification from it. The archetypal mother remains, but no longer occupies the position of command. In her place, the individual learns to become a source of nourishment for themselves. He wrote a key sentence for this process. The individual can no longer remain a child. He must detach himself from the mother. The detachment Jung speaks of is not emotional rejection, but psychological separation. It is the moment one accepts that no person and no thing can fully replace the responsibility of living one's own life. The sadness that accompanies this realization is unavoidable, yet it is precisely this sadness that opens the door to maturity. As the mother complex is gradually integrated, a subtle shift takes place. Instead of seeking absolute safety from the outside, the individual begins to develop an inner capacity for nourishment. Instead of panicking in the face of distance, they learn to endure emptiness. And instead of living in constant fear of abandonment, they slowly realize that one's presence to oneself is the deepest foundation of safety. Thus, the mother complex. Though it may be the first complex is not a life sentence. It is a point of departure. When made conscious, it no longer binds the individual to dependency or anxiety, but becomes a gateway to a deeper form of maturity. And it is from here that the Jungian journey continues to unfold from foundational complexes toward structures of authority, discipline, and personal strength, where the father complex begins to step onto the stage of the psyche. Once the mother complex has been recognized as the first ground of safety and dependency, the Jungian journey naturally leads us to an equally decisive counterforce, the father complex. If the mother shapes the feeling of being allowed to exist, then the father shapes the question, where do I stand in this world? And it is precisely at this boundary between safety and challenge, between protection and demand, that power, discipline, and rebellion begin to carve their marks into personality. According to Carl Gustav Jung, the father complex revolves around authority, law, order, and social positioning. It is formed at the intersection between the real father, or the paternal image within the nurturing environment, and the father archetype in the collective unconscious, the image of law, order, spirit, logos, and principle. If the mother archetype speaks the language of emotion and nourishment, the father archetype speaks the language of rules, boundaries, and meaning. Jung emphasized the dual nature of this archetype. The father can be a guide who provides structure for the child to enter the world, yet he can also become an imposer, turning order into psychological violence. Jung articulated this dimension with clarity. The father represents the principle of authority, order, and law, but also the danger of tyranny, because it contains both light and shadow. The father complex often reveals itself through two seemingly opposite extremes: blind submission or radical rebellion. In the first extreme, the individual seeks safety by dissolving themselves into external authority, superiors, institutions, doctrines, or even idealized figures. Authority becomes a substitute father. In the second extreme, the individual defines themselves through opposition, breaking rules, rejecting all authority. Yet the paradox is this rebellion, too, can be a form of domination by the complex. For if one's identity exists only through resistance, then external power is still determining one's direction. Jung warned of this dangerous identification when he observed the rebellion against authority often conceals an unrecognized identification with it. In other words, the person who fights authority obsessively may be living just as deeply in its shadow as the one who submits to it. Both reveal that the father complex has not yet been integrated, has not yet entered into a dialogical relationship with the mature ego. Another subtle manifestation of the father complex is the fear of judgment. When the negative father archetype dominates the inner world, becomes harsh. The inner voice speaks in tones of condemnation, demands perfection, and shows no mercy for mistakes. Jung regarded this as a sign that authority has been internalized in a cruel form. He wrote, "Where love stops, power begins, and violence and terror." When love, nourished by the mother archetype, is not strong enough to counterbalance it, the father archetype can turn into an inner tyrant. The consequence is a life lived under constant tension, endlessly striving to be right or to meet standards, while gradually losing the capacity to feel the deeper meaning of life. Discipline in this case no longer serves growth. It becomes an instrument of punishment. Yet Jung did not view the father complex as something to be eliminated. On the contrary, he saw its integration as an essential condition for the formation of personal strength and independent judgment. Without an integrated inner father, the individual remains lost between submission and rebellion, between dependence and denial. Jung wrote a pivotal sentence for this process. True authority is not imposed from without, but grows from within. To integrate the father complex is not to submit to rules, but to internalize principle. It is the moment when the individual no longer requires an external authority to define right and wrong, but develops an inner moral compass. Discipline then ceases to be coercion. It becomes a voluntary commitment to what is meaningful. Jung drew a sharp distinction between dead discipline and living discipline. Dead discipline serves conformity. Living discipline serves becoming. He emphasized that only when the father complex is freed from authoritarian rigidity can the energy of logos truly open the path toward mature consciousness, the capacity for coherent thought, for asking the right questions, and for taking responsibility for one's choices. One sign that the father complex is being integrated is the emergence of a flexible inner authority. The individual can respect rules without losing vitality, can challenge without destroying, can lead without imposing. Jung saw this as the transition from the child to the adult within psychological life. He wrote, "The individual who has not been able to emancipate himself from the father complex remains a child no matter how old he becomes." The liberation Jung refers to is not a severing of ties with the father or with society, but a release from unconscious domination. When the complex is made conscious, the individual no longer reacts automatically to authority. They can respond with reflection. This is where inner freedom begins. When we place the father complex alongside the mother complex, a symmetrical structure becomes clear. One side represents safety, the other challenge. One emotion, the other meaning. One nourishment, the other orientation. Jung believed that maturity arises only when these two archetypes are held in a creative tension. Without the mother, the human being becomes barren. Without the father, the human being becomes directionless. Thus, integrating the father complex does not turn us into rigid beings. It gives us an axis, not the axis of imposed power, but the axis of intrinsic meaning. And from this point of balance, the individual becomes stable enough to move forward into subtler conflicts of the psyche, where self-worth, inferiority, and illusions of power begin to surface. There, the Jungian journey continues to deepen. No longer asking only who leads me, but asking, how do I value myself when no one stands above me or beneath me? Once the father complex has been placed in its proper position, no longer as authority imposed from outside, but as an inner guiding principle, a more subtle conflict begins to emerge. This is no longer a question of who holds power, but a quieter and more persistent question. Where does my value lie? It is precisely at this intersection that Jung leads us to a pair of complexes that often accompany one another, like two sides of the same coin, the inferiority complex and megalomania, the illusion of power. According to Carl Gustav Jung, the inferiority complex is not merely a passing feeling of low confidence. It is a stable psychological structure in which the individual carries an unconscious belief that they are lesser insufficient or unworthy. This belief is rarely spoken aloud. It hides within constant comparison, fear of judgment, and a need for recognition. So intense, it becomes exhausting. Externally, the person may appear modest or even self-effacing. Internally, however, a silent struggle is taking place, a struggle for the right to feel that one deserves to exist. Jung observed that when the ego cannot bear the weight of this sense of worthlessness, the unconscious intervenes with a powerful compensatory mechanism. This is when megalomania emerges, not necessarily in the form of overt delusion, but more often as subtle fantasies of specialness, grand mission, or exceptional superiority. The purpose of this mechanism is not to deceive others, but to protect the ego from collapse. Jung called this state inflation and defined it with chilling precision. Inflation is a state of consciousness in which the conscious personality feels itself identical with the self. When inflation occurs, the ego, meant only to be the center of consciousness, identifies itself with the self. The individual feels larger than life, endowed with special meaning, or elevated above others. Yet the paradox is this: inflation is not a sign of strength, but a defensive reaction to deep inferiority. Jung warned that inferiority and megalomania are not two separate complexes, but two poles of the same axis. When one pole is suppressed for too long, the other erupts to restore balance. He wrote, "Every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol or morphine or idealism." Here, the idealism Jung refers to is precisely a form of addiction to self-idealization, the belief that one must be special, great, or destined for something extraordinary in order to be worthy of life. Beneath such fantasies often lies a deeply buried fear. If I am merely ordinary, I will not be loved. In everyday life, this pair of complexes manifests in familiar ways. The person dominated by inferiority may constantly seek praise, yet never believe it. The person caught in megalomania may speak of humility, yet cannot tolerate challenge or contradiction. Both reveal an ego in oscillation, unable to find a stable inner ground. Jung saw a close connection between this dynamic and an unintegrated father complex. When inner authority has not yet formed, the individual must borrow value from the outside to determine their worth. Either they bow before standards, or they construct a grandiose self-image to defend against feelings of smallness. In both cases, self-worth remains out of reach. Jung described this tragedy with a penetrating observation. The more a man's life is shaped by his complexes, the less he is master of his fate. When inferiority dominates, the individual becomes small in their own eyes. When inflation dominates, the individual loses contact with reality. Both sever the person from the limits of real humanity, where capability and imperfection coexist. And it is precisely this loss of contact that gives rise to prolonged suffering. Importantly, Jung did not regard megalomania as mere arrogance. He viewed it with the compassion of a clinician. It is the cry of a wounded ego. When the psyche cannot endure the feeling of inferiority, it must inflate in order to survive. Yet this inflation always carries the risk of collapse because it is not grounded in the solid foundation of reality. Jung warned, the danger of inflation is that the individual becomes arrogant, inflated, and loses touch with reality. The Jungian path does not encourage us to violently shatter illusions, nor does it promote cultivating a sense of specialness. Instead, Jung proposed a more difficult yet more sustainable path, a conscious return to the ordinary. This is the capacity to accept oneself as not great yet real, not perfect yet possessing an intrinsic value that requires no proof. Integrating the inferiority complex and megalomania does not mean boosting self-esteem through slogans. It is the process of withdrawing energy from extreme comparisons and returning it to lived reality, to the concrete limits of being human. At that point, self-worth no longer depends on being above or below others, but on the capacity to live truthfully with oneself. Jung once wrote a simple sentence that carries particular weight. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. To look inward here is not to glorify the ego, but to clearly perceive its fragility. And it is precisely within this fragility that a new form of stability emerges. Not the stability of power or greatness, but the stability of a human being who has accepted their finitude. When the inferiority complex no longer needs to hide, and megalomania no longer needs to compensate the individual steps out of the endless loop of evaluation and comparison. From here, the Jungian journey continues deeper into the structures of concealment and exposure within the personality, where the social mask persona confronts the shadow. There, the question is no longer, how much am I worth? But what am I hiding in order to be accepted? Once the inferiority complex and megalomania are seen as two compensatory poles of the same insecurity about self-worth, a more refined layer of defense begins to reveal itself. No longer limited to feelings of smallness or grandeur, the psyche shifts into another survival strategy performance. It is here that Jung brings us to the center of one of the most silent yet persistent conflicts of modern life, the struggle between the mask persona and the shadow. According to Carl Gustav Jung, the persona is not an inborn falsehood. It is a necessary psychological function that enables the individual to adapt to society, assume roles, and gain recognition. Jung described the persona as the mask we wear to live among others, an unspoken agreement between the individual and the collective. He wrote, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself, as well as others, think one is." This statement is not meant to condemn the persona, but to point out its limits. The persona is a negotiated image between social expectations and the need to be accepted. The tragedy begins when a person identifies with this mask, when they believe they are the role, forgetting that it is only a very thin layer of the total personality. At this point, the connection to the inferiority complex and megalomania becomes clear. When a sense of worthlessness quietly persists, the persona becomes a shield. When grandiose fantasies arise, the persona becomes a stage. The deeper the insecurity, the more investment is placed in a proper image, moral, successful, composed, strong. But Jung warned that every overemphasized quality inevitably casts a corresponding shadow. That shadow is the shadow, the collection of desires, impulses, emotions, and potentials rejected because they do not fit the image one seeks to maintain. Jung did not define the shadow as pure evil. He saw it as the unlived parts of the person. He wrote, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality." The shadow is a moral problem not because it is bad, but because it forces the ego to face uncomfortable truths about itself. Within the shadow lie envy, anger, selfishness, but also vitality, creativity, instinct, and raw strength. When the persona is built too perfectly, the shadow does not disappear. It thickens. Jung emphasized this paradox with a famous observation: the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. This is not merely a metaphor, but a psychological law. Every time we deny an unacceptable impulse, it is not destroyed. It is pushed into the dark, where it accumulates energy. And repressed energy, sooner or later, seeks an outlet through emotional outbursts, contradictory behavior, or harsh moral judgments directed at others. It is precisely here that hypocrisy emerges not as deliberate deception, but as the consequence of identification with the persona. Jung stated this with stark clarity. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When an individual allows themselves only to be good, the shadow lives for them. What we do not permit in ourselves, we will see in others, and condemn with particular intensity. This mechanism connects directly to the inferiority complex. We must feel right in order not to face feeling not enough. At the same time, it feeds a form of moral megalomania. I am better. I see more clearly. I stand on the side of light. Jung regarded this as one of the deep roots of both personal and collective conflict. He wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own souls. Avoiding the shadow is understandable. It threatens the image we have painstakingly constructed. But the cost of avoidance is inner dissociation. When the persona dominates the shadow, becomes hostile. When the shadow erupts, the persona collapses. The person becomes trapped in a cycle performance. Repression explosion, remorse, and then performance again. Jung did not advocate being authentic in the sense of abandoning all boundaries. He warned that identification with the shadow is just as dangerous as identification with the persona. He wrote, "Identification with the shadow is just as dangerous as identification with the persona." The Jungian path is not about choosing sides, but about dialogue. Integrating the shadow does not mean acting out every impulse. It means taking conscious responsibility for them. When a rejected part is seen, it loses its power to manipulate from the dark. The ego then ceases to be an actor or a fugitive and becomes a mediator. One sign that the persona and the shadow are moving toward balance is moral flexibility. The individual retains values without needing to be perfect, maintains boundaries without needing self-righteousness. They can acknowledge envy without acting destructively, recognize anger without letting it rule. Jung regarded this as an essential step on the path of individuation. He wrote a key sentence for this process. To confront a person with his shadow is to show him his own light. The light Jung refers to is not spotless purity, but the capacity to see wholeness. When the persona no longer has to conceal everything, and the shadow no longer has to sabotage from behind the scenes, a new form of authenticity emerges. Not flamboyant, not hypocritical, but alive and trustworthy. Thus, the struggle between mask and shadow is not a battle to be won, but a dialogue to be sustained. And from this dialogue, a deeper psychological capacity arises the ability to withdraw projections, to stop seeing evil in others, and begin recognizing it within oneself. There, the Jungian journey continues to unfold, no longer asking, "Who am I before society?" but "What am I projecting onto the world?" When the mask, persona, and the shadow have been placed into dialogue, when we begin to see that what we hide does not disappear, but merely changes location, another psychological mechanism immediately steps to the forefront of relational life. Projection. If the persona is what we perform, the shadow is what we reject, then projection is the way we hurl these unacknowledged parts into the world and mistakenly believe they belong to others. It is here that Jung exposes one of the bitterest paradoxes of the human mind, we fight most fiercely against the demons we do not dare to see within ourselves. According to Carl Gustav Jung, projection is not a moral failing, nor a conscious scheme. It is a natural mechanism of the unconscious when the ego lacks the capacity to contain a particular psychic content. Instead of admitting this, too, is in me, the psyche chooses the less painful path. This is outside me. Jung described this mechanism with great clarity. Projection is one of the commonest psychic phenomena. Everything that is unconscious in ourselves, we discover in our neighbor. This statement is not an accusation, but a revelation of a universal truth. When an impulse, emotion, or tendency does not fit the image of the persona, such as envy, ambition, aggression, or vulnerability, it does not vanish. It seeks an external host. And other people, especially those closest to us, become the perfect projection screens. What is striking is this: the intensity of judgment is often proportional to the degree of projection. We do not merely dislike a trait in others. We despise it, rage against it, or become obsessed with it. Jung recognized that such excessive reactions do not originate in the object, but in the unconscious content being activated. He wrote, "The projection carries the image of the subject into the object. When projection occurs, we no longer see others as they are, but as our psyche needs them to be. The other becomes arrogant, malicious, selfish, or conversely, becomes a hero, a savior, an ideal." Jung emphasized that projection does not carry only negative content. Intense idealization is also a form of projection, one in which we attribute to others qualities that have not yet been lived within ourselves. Here, the connection to the shadow becomes unmistakable. The shadow does not contain only what is bad, but also potentials that were never permitted to exist. When we harshly judge another's ambition, it may be because we have never allowed ourselves to want more. When we condemn weakness, it may be because we have long denied ourselves the right to be tired. Projection, in its deepest sense, is a confession turned inside out. Jung warned that if projection is not recognized, it will poison relationships. We no longer encounter real people, but phantoms constructed by the unconscious. He wrote a pivotal sentence: "As long as we do not make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life, and we will call it fate." In the context of projection, this fate often takes the form of repeating relationships. we continually meet the same type of detestable person, the same conflicts, the same feelings of betrayal or being misunderstood. Jung did not see this as coincidence. He saw the hand of the unconscious attempting to bring rejected contents back into the field of consciousness through other people. A subtle point in Jung's thinking is his view that projection is not a mistake to be corrected immediately, but an inevitable stage on the path toward consciousness. For before we can recognize something as ours, we often must first see it outside. The problem is not that we project, but whether we dare to withdraw the projection. Withdrawing projections is one of the most painful psychological acts because it requires relinquishing a comforting sense of moral superiority, the feeling that the problem lies with others. Jung called this a courageous step because it forces the ego to take responsibility for contents once expelled outward. He wrote, "The withdrawal of projections is a painful process that often requires moral effort. The moral effort Jung refers to is not self-condemnation, but inner honesty. When we realize that the demon we hate in others also lives within us, we lose an enemy, but we also lose an excuse. With no one left to blame, we stand exposed before ourselves. This does not mean that all conflicts are projections, or that all harmful behavior in others is imaginary. Jung was very clear on this point, recognizing projection does not deny reality. It clarifies how we perceive reality. We can still set boundaries, still say no, but we no longer need hatred in order to do so. Reaction shifts from eruption to sober judgment. One sign that projection is being withdrawn is a reduction in emotional intensity. The other person no longer drives us mad, even if their behavior has not changed. At this point, the energy once bound up in judgment is released for self-awareness. Jung saw this as a crucial step on the path of individuation. For the individual begins to reclaim alienated parts of the self. Jung wrote a concise yet weighty sentence. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. This statement does not encourage self-blame, but awake curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why is that person like this?" we begin to ask, "What in me is being touched?" This shift from the outer world to the inner world marks the moment when a person reclaims ownership of their own soul. Thus, projection is not only the source of conflict, but also a gateway to maturity. Each time we dare to withdraw a projection, we recover a fragment of energy that had been exiled. Relationships with others become less dramatic, while the relationship with oneself becomes deeper. And it is precisely from this point that the Jungian journey enters a new phase from interpretive understanding to experiential understanding. When projections are withdrawn, the unconscious no longer needs to shout through conflict. It begins to whisper through dreams, symbols, and subtle compensations. There, the question is no longer, who is the demon? But what is the soul trying to say when there is no one left to blame? When the mechanism of projection has been withdrawn, when the demon is no longer seen in others, but begins to be recognized within oneself, the psyche crosses a new threshold, a movement from subjective interpretation toward objective verification. At this threshold, Jung is no longer merely a thinker or a symbolic analyst. He becomes an experimental scientist. It is here that the word association experiment emerges as a rare bridge connecting the elusive world of the unconscious with concrete scientific evidence. According to Carl Gustav Jung, if complexes truly exist and possess an autonomous life, they must leave measurable traces in everyday psychological functioning. Jung was not satisfied with purely metaphorical descriptions. He sought to demonstrate that the unconscious not only speaks through dreams or symbols, but intervenes directly in waking thought, even when we believe ourselves to be fully in control. The word association, test, was designed with disarming simplicity. Jung read participants a list of stimulus words: mother, father, guilt, money, power, death, and asked them to respond with the first word that came to mind. But what Jung observed was not the content of the answers. It was how the answers appeared, delays repetitions, confusion, forgetting, nervous laughter, or shifts in tone of voice. The results astonished him. Words that touched the nucleus of a complex often produced abnormal reactions, as if the mind had stumbled over an invisible obstacle. Jung called these reactions complex indicators. He wrote, "The existence of complexes can be proved experimentally by means of the association experiment." Here, proved is not a word used lightly. Jung asserted that complexes can be demonstrated not through speculation, but through measurable psychological and physiological responses. When a word activates a complex, the flow of thought ceases to be smooth. The unconscious intervenes, slowing, diverting, or interrupting what appears to be an automatic conscious reflex. This led Jung to a revolutionary conclusion. The unconscious does not sleep when we are awake. It does not wait for dreams or hypnosis to speak. It is present in every moment of thought, silently adjusting, obstructing, or propelling our responses. Jung wrote, "The unconscious is not merely a passive container, but an active living system." The word association experiment revealed that complexes behave like psychological objects with mass. They draw in energy, libido, distort the trajectory of thought, and create blind spots in perception. When a complex is activated, the ego is no longer the sole center of control. Consciousness is intruded upon, even if only for a few seconds, but long enough to alter behavior. What is particularly significant is this: participants often noticed nothing unusual. They might deny, rationalize, or laugh it off. But the data did not lie. Jung observed complexes behave like independent beings. This statement is not poetic. It is empirical. In the experiment, complexes respond before consciousness does. They hear the stimulus word reply through hesitation or disturbance, and only afterward does the ego assemble a reasonable explanation. This reverses the common belief that we think first and feel later. For Jung, we are often touched first, and only then do we think. Here, the connection to projection becomes unmistakable. The words that most strongly triggered reactions in the experiment were often related to conflicts expelled outward in daily life. Power, guilt, desire, failure. What we refuse to recognize as ours into ordinary experience reveals itself when named precisely. The experiment thus becomes a cold mirror, requiring no moral interpretation. Jung understood that these conclusions wound the ego's illusion of freedom. Yet he did not see this as negative. On the contrary, he believed that humility before the unconscious is the foundation of genuine freedom. He wrote, "Freedom of will exists only to a limited extent. It is limited by the unconscious." The word association experiment was not intended to strip away freedom, but to reposition it. Freedom does not lie in denying the unconscious, but in recognizing the points at which it intervenes. When we know where we stumble, we gain the opportunity to pause rather than be blindly dragged along. This insight is especially meaningful in the modern context, where people believe they act entirely consciously. Jung demonstrated that even in the fastest linguistic reflexes, where we assume no thinking occurs, the unconscious still participates. It is not a marginal saboteur, but a silent co-author of every decision. One far-reaching consequence of this discovery is a shift in how we understand mistakes. When someone misspeaks, forgets a word, or responds slowly, Jung did not rush to correct them. He listened. For there, the psyche is revealing something more truthful than fluent answers ever could. He wrote, "Mistakes are often the most revealing reactions." In the Jungian spirit, the experiment does not end in the laboratory. It opens onto a new way of living, listening to one's own small deviations. When we stumble over words, avoid a topic, or react too quickly to a question, this may be a sign that a complex is knocking at the door of consciousness. Thus, the word association experiment is not only scientific proof of complexes, it is a reminder that the psyche is never silent. Even when we believe ourselves awake, rational, and in control, the unconscious continues to whisper through delays, confusions, and tiny gaps in the stream of thought. And it is from these gaps that the Jungian journey moves still deeper. When complexes have been demonstrated not only through subjective experience, but through objective data, the next question is no longer, do they exist? But what is the psyche attempting to self-regulate through them? Here Jung leads us into the next dimension, compensation and the purposiveness of dreams, where the unconscious does not merely obstruct, but actively seeks to heal. When complexes have been demonstrated, not only through subjective experience, but also through empirical data, through the word association experiment, another door opens within Jung, as thought the unconscious does not merely interfere, it also regulates. If complexes are the points at which the unconscious stumbles in waking life, then dreams are where the unconscious speaks in complete sentences. It is precisely here that Jung advances one of his most profound and healing insights. The psyche is a self-regulating system, and dreams are the central mechanism of that regulation. According to Carl Gustav Jung, dreams are not random remnants of memory, nor are they merely the fulfillment of repressed wishes. Jung strongly rejected the view of dreams as psychological waste. He regarded dreams as purposeful messages produced by the unconscious to compensate for imbalances in the conscious attitude. He wrote a foundational statement. The dream is a spontaneous self-portrayal in symbolic form of the actual situation in the unconscious. The phrase actual situation is decisive here. Dreams do not reflect who we think we are. They reflect who we actually are at a deeper level of the psyche. When consciousness becomes too one-sided, too rational, too controlling, too moralistic, or too identified with the persona. The unconscious responds by sending opposing images. This is not punishment. It is an attempt to restore balance. Jung called this mechanism compensation. He emphasized that dreams do not oppose consciousness. They complement it. If we ignore emotions during the day, dreams revive them at night. If we believe ourselves strong and self-sufficient during waking life, dreams may return us to vulnerability. Jung wrote, "Dreams compensate for the one-sidedness of conscious attitudes. This explains why dreams often confuse or even disturb us. They do not confirm the self-image we prefer. They challenge it. Yet it is precisely this challenge that carries healing potential. When consciousness moves too far in one direction, the unconscious pulls us back, not through logic, but through symbol. A central point in Jung's thinking is that dreams do not speak the language of the ego. They speak the language of the unconscious images, paradoxes, metaphors. Therefore, any attempt to decode dreams mechanically is bound to fail. Jung warned against imposing prefabricated meanings onto symbols. He wrote, "A dream symbol cannot be separated from the individual who dreams it. To understand a dream, therefore, is not to consult a dictionary, but to enter into dialogue, a dialogue with complexes, with the shadow, with neglected parts of the self." When a dream repeats itself, Jung saw this as a sign that consciousness is not listening. The unconscious is forced to repeat itself using stronger images, sometimes more frightening ones. Jung went even further by stating that dreams are not only compensatory, but also teleological. That is, they are oriented toward purpose. Dreams do not merely correct the present. They guide future development of the psyche. He wrote, "Dreams are not merely reactive. They are also prospective. This prospective quality turns dreams into maps of potential. They reveal unlived possibilities, directions the ego has not yet dared to take. When a person is trapped in a complex, dreams often present images of transformation, not as promises, but as openings toward new psychological possibilities. In the context of complexes, this insight is especially significant. Complexes, as Jung demonstrated, drain energy and rigidify psychic life. Dreams, by contrast, redistribute energy. They allow complexes to speak within a safe, symbolic space, rather than disrupting waking life through emotional outbursts. Jung wrote, "The dream gives expression to the psychic situation of the moment. When a mother, complex father, complex or inferiority complex dominates dreams, frequently present-related imagery, not to condemn, but to reveal the structure at work. For this reason, Jung regarded dream work as one of the most direct paths to engaging with complexes without being possessed by them. Importantly, Jung did not view dreams as commands to be obeyed. He opposed blind submission to dream imagery. The Jungian attitude is one of serious listening without servitude. Dreams provide information. Consciousness bears responsibility for action. Jung wrote, "The dream shows the inner truth and reality of the patient as it really is. That truth may be difficult to accept, but avoiding it means continuing to live out of alignment. When consciousness begins to adjust its attitude, not to be right, but to be more honest, dreams change as well. They become less violent, more guiding than compensatory. This is a sign that inner balance is being restored. In the Jungian spirit, dreams are not things to be solved and discarded. They are an ongoing dialogue between consciousness and the unconscious. Each dream is a letter from the deepest layer of the psyche, not to frighten us, but to prevent us from losing our way. Jung once wrote a deeply reassuring line: "The unconscious is not a demonic monster, but a natural part of the psyche." When dreams are understood as part of a self-regulating system, fear of the unconscious begins to dissolve. Strange or frightening images are no longer seen as signs of pathology, but as attempts at healing. At this point, the Jungian journey reaches maturity. The individual stops fighting the unconscious and begins to cooperate with it. And from this cooperation, a larger horizon opens. When complexes are engaged in dialogue, when dreams are listened to, and when consciousness accepts the necessity of self-correction, the psyche begins to orient itself toward the ultimate goal Jung named individuation. At that point, the question is no longer, "What is wrong with me?" but rather, "What kind of human being am I being called to become?" When dreams have been recognized as the psyche's mechanisms of compensation and guidance, when the unconscious is no longer seen as a disturber, but as a self-regulating partner, the Jungian journey naturally moves toward its destination, individuation. If complexes reveal the places where the psyche has become fragmented, and if dreams disclose the opposites that must be balanced, then individuation is the process of integration, the point at which the fragments no longer compete for control, but are arranged within a living order centered on the self. According to Carl Gustav Jung, individuation is not about becoming more special than others, nor is it the completion of an idealized ego. Jung rejected every attempt to turn individuation into a project of ego glorification. He emphasized that it is a natural process of the psyche aimed at becoming whole, where consciousness and the unconscious enter into a creative tension rather than annihilating one another. Jung wrote, "Individuation is the process by which a person becomes a psychological individual that is a separate, indivisible unity or whole." Whole here does not mean perfect. It means spacious enough to contain contradiction. In an individuated personality, the persona still exists, but no longer dominates. The shadow is still present, but no longer sabotages. Complexes still appear, but no longer possess. All are organized around the self, a coordinating center, deeper than the ego. Jung described the self with a famous paradox. The self is not only the center, but also the circumference of the whole personality. This paradox shows that the self is both the orienting center and the encompassing boundary where all opposites can coexist. Individuation, therefore, does not eliminate complexes. It places them where they belong. When complexes are recognized and entered into dialogue through dreams, symbols, and awareness, the energy trapped within them is released to serve a life of meaning. A common misunderstanding is to regard individuation as a path of isolation. Jung said the opposite. Individuation does not withdraw a person from the community. It liberates the person from living through borrowed roles. When one no longer has to perform in order to be accepted, one can be authentically present in relationships. Jung warned that society often encourages identification with the persona because it creates surface order. But that order is purchased at the cost of inner dissociation. He wrote, "The persona is a compromise between individual and society. Individuation does not destroy this compromise. It makes it conscious. The individuated person still holds social roles, but no longer equates the self with those roles. This mindful distance brings inner freedom. Freedom not to do everything, but not to be done by unconscious forces. At the heart of individuation lies inner morality. Jung clearly distinguished between imposed morality and emergent morality. Imposed morality relies on external standards. Emergent morality arises from listening to the self. When confronting the shadow, the individual is no longer hypocritical. When withdrawing projections, the individual no longer needs hatred to define the self. When listening to dreams, the individual is no longer one-sided. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. The pain here is not punishment. It is the cost of honesty. Individuation requires the courage to relinquish convenient illusions of absolute innocence, of perfect power, of a contradiction-free identity. Yet, in that relinquishment, a new kind of steadiness appears, the steadiness of one who accepts limitation. Jung often used the image of the night sea journey to describe this phase of transformation. The night sea does not promise immediate light. It demands trust in depth. In the language of tonight, video sleep itself is the threshold of that journey. When consciousness loosens, the unconscious leads. When the persona rests, the self speaks. Jung wrote, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." Awakening here does not oppose sleep. On the contrary, sleeping properly, sleeping with listening, is a form of awakening. For in sleep, the psyche continues its work toward wholeness. Individuation is not a daytime project. It is a lifelong process in which every night, every dream, every reaction brought into awareness becomes a small step toward the self. The crucial point is this: individuation does not exclude contradiction. It contains it. Jung saw the capacity to endure paradox as a sign of maturity. The individuated person can be both strong and vulnerable, disciplined and flexible, attached and free. Jung wrote, "The capacity for holding the tension of opposites is the most important prerequisite for the individuation process. When that tension is held without the need to win one side, transformative energy emerges on its own. Complexes lose their power to possess. The persona loses its dominance. The shadow loses its capacity to sabotage. In their place, the self coordinates. This is not a false reconciliation, but a living order, the order of a self-regulating system. Thus, Jung's invitation is not to become perfect, but to become whole. Wholeness means abandoning no part of oneself, living without masks, not blaming the darkness, not deifying the light. Wholeness means being spacious enough to contain oneself. Tonight, as you allow sleep to arrive, consider it the night sea of individuation. Let the symbols guide you. Let the complexes speak without possessing. Let the persona rest without collapsing. You do not need to become anyone else. Jung reminds us with a simple yet profound truth. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not better, not more correct, but more real. And in that reality, the psyche finds what it has been seeking from the beginning: wholeness. Imagine your mind as an ancient, multi-storied house. Consciousness is only a small, flickering candle on the upper floor, illuminating what is familiar and easy to name. Below, in the damp basement, are the complexes, the long-time inhabitants carrying memories, pain, longing, and things never yet listened to. Tonight, instead of fearing the strange sounds rising from the darkness, try opening yourself. Not to control, but to listen, as if meeting old companions, telling you the true story of who you are. When you no longer deny them, something unexpected happens. The fragments no longer need to be forced. They find their places on their own. From chaos, a deeper order slowly appears. Not the order of perfection, but the order of wholeness. Like a mandala, where light and shadow do not oppose each other, but together create the most complete form of who you are. If tonight's journey touches you, stay with the video and let sleep continue to guide you. And if you wish to keep exploring deeper layers of the human mind, please subscribe, and leave a comment. Which part of you was awakened tonight?